If we all did this, we would be, a better human race. Yeah.
Oh,
I think psychological safety is difficult for a lot of organizations to discuss because it implies talking about interpersonal relationships, and not a lot of people want to talk about that.
they're not ready.
I take feedback on board, I really do, but I'll give you a hard time because chances are that I have thought about it 100 times before doing something. So if you have a different opinion, I will have a lot of arguments as to why I've done something. You don't sign a psychological contract with people, but you do get to a job with a lot of psychological expectations.
So for those listening and for myself as well, because I'm new to this topic, what does psychological safety mean overall and in an organization?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm always nervous when it's about giving a definition because there's a lot of ways. Usually when a concept is popular in research and in sort of practical applications, and unfortunately, so psychologists have a tendency to create 1,000 different definitions and 1,000 different constructs. But let's say that one of the researchers that contributed the most in the last few decades about this topic, so Amy Edmondson, defined it as ability for people to take interpersonal risks without fear of consequences. So in other words, psychological safety in a team is when people feel okay to add up ideas, make mistakes, make comments, have healthy conflict without fear of repercussions. Yeah, so if I say this, I'm going to be punished. If I make a comment on this, I'm not going to get a promotion, for example, or anything else that could be a repercussion in a work environment. So when you have psychological safety, you don't have that fear. Therefore, you feel more inclined to make contributions, add ideas, have healthy discussions, and have also, I guess, more genuine and authentic relationships with everyone else.
Yeah. And how come this is not being talked about enough? Because when I saw you at the event talking about it, it was the first time I heard about it. And I was like, but this is happening everywhere.
My personal opinion, so for instance, I go about my job as a psychologist first and foremost. And there's not a lot of us in HR. I think the majority of the psychologists, like industrial organizational psychologists, or even coaching psychologists, kind of work outside organizations as consultants, which is something I did for a while in my career. But then internally, there's not a lot of us because it's a massacre sometimes. You come from all this knowledge, all this science about behavior, and then HR people tend to be a lot more pragmatic. And usually, on average, a lot of HR people, start working in HR because they love people, but then they have this joke that they hate people after a while, right? So why was I telling you this? Oh, yes, because going at my job, which is in sort of talent, development and performance as a psychologist, I do believe human relationships should be above everything else. And this is a taboo topic. I think a lot of people come to work with a lot of unresolved issues about themselves and about their relationships, whether it's their family relationships or their personal relationships in their current sort of context. And the last thing they want to do is worry about all of that in a work context. Like, I'm here to work. Sometimes when I do coaching, people tell me I have my work persona does this or my work persona does that. And I'm just like, you're fooling yourself. There's no such thing. I guess there are moments or there are behaviors that you adopt in a work environment different than, what you would do at home. Yeah. So for example, I'm a lot more, I guess, conflict prone with my husband than I would be with a colleague, right? And, and if I have a big fight with my husband, I will shout, and maybe a couple of times I've even broken a thing because, that's how passionate I am about fights.
The Mediterranean blood.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But at work, I would never do that. So that I understand that you kind of, moderate, your behaviors, but you're still yourself. And then how do you go about relationships? Well, if you haven't solved, when it comes to like your self-awareness or some like the trauma or interpersonal dynamics that you haven't really addressed in your life, then doing that at work will be even more complicated. And sometimes talking about psychological safety or talking about so many other constructs that psychology has developed around relationships at work is embarrassing for people. I always say this. I once was in a workshop. I was training some volunteers to develop a coaching mindset. So not really like a coaching training, but more like, let's develop some coaching skills around how you work with these vulnerable people that you're working with. And I said to someone, because they asked me like, what is the most important thing to have as a coach? And I said, love. And they looked at me and they were like, well, surely love is not an appropriate word. And I mean, what do you mean by that? It's like, maybe positive regard. And I'm like, no, I mean love. I don't mean positive regard. I think you have to unconditionally love the people that you coach. It's not sexual. It's not romantic. It's just appreciation for another human being, and also like almost like blind trust in their ability to solve whatever issue they have, right? But people are embarrassed by that. When I say this, and it happens so many times, because a lot of times people ask me, what's behind the work that you do, and I say love, and they're just like, why are we talking this? It's embarrassing. So I think psychological safety is difficult for a lot of organizations to discuss because it implies talking about interpersonal relationships. And not a lot of people want to talk about that.
They're not ready. Particularly people who are like seasoned in their jobs or have been there a while, and they probably think that this is just like a trending topic, right? But I think this is going to really blow up and become more and more popular. I also, go to universities. I know people who are studying psychology and wanting to go into like the HR space. So this is new for people, right? Like that you can actually incorporate your psychology education or experience with HR or talent, like you said as well, as a leader as well, right? Yeah.
Yes, you can. I mean, it's been around for a while, but it's more so in the US. Our discipline started in the 60s, especially in the U.S. Navy or some Army contexts. But then it expanded to organizations, and it's getting more and more relevant in Europe now. There are still some countries where, for example, like I don't think I could ever even do my job in Italy. It just doesn't exist.
No.
And other countries in Southern Europe, are still a bit behind on applying psychology to the workplace. But in the UK, for example, it's becoming more and more a thing. In the Netherlands as well, like in Northern Europe in general, it's becoming more of a thing to have psychologists in organizations in different capacity.
Yeah. So you give workshops and trainings like to companies and
Yeah.
right?
So if you work as a freelancer, yes, that's what I used to do with my company. So I used to do coaching. I used to do assessment, for example. So in assessment centers, like I used to design the psychological side of things. So behavioral traits or personality traits that were more conducive to, the role that people were interviewing for. And then coaching, I did a lot of lecturing, but now I only focus on whys and sort of our talent journey within the organization, starting from company onboarding all the way to leadership development and team dynamics and individual performance.
It's amazing that you can incorporate what you've studied and what you're passionate about into your everyday job as well.
Yeah, it's a cool job.
I'm just curious with the coaching and the trainings you've been given. The trainings you've given. What was like the recurring theme or topics or questions people had? For example, were they saying like about retention, for example?
When you talk about psychological safety, for example, which is a topic that I try to incorporate a lot when I am doing work with senior leadership teams, for example, or with leads in general, because the leader does have a huge responsibility in fostering the team environment. I think some of the questions that come up the most are around what I was saying. So the embarrassment of like discussing interpersonal relationships and where is the line? Because there's also like one of the pieces of research that contributed to make psychological safety so popular came from Google. This Project Aristotle that was like published everywhere, got like a huge article on the New York Times, and then it was like taken up by a lot of different publishers. Um, they were discussing really like the difference between being friends and having psychological safety, right? So one of their main arguments was we never really found out that our high performing teams were teams of people that would go and have a beer after work or develop really deep friendships. They just had established psychological safety, so healthy conflict, no fear of repercussion, etc., etc. And people struggle with that sometimes because it's just like, so, but how do you how do you develop that if you don't become friends? Well, you can, like you can be respectful of other people's opinions. You can be open to challenge. You can be very good at giving and receiving feedback, and you can really respect another human being without becoming their best friend. But again, because people have such messed up personal lives, in my opinion, sometimes they struggle with reconciling their personal human experience with the human experience that we're asking them to have at work. This happens to me when I coach a lot of leaders, and they're struggling with having difficult conversations. They're struggling with giving tough feedback. They're struggling with like letting go, some people. But the truth is that as painful as those moments are, you should always get there with an awareness that you've done everything that you could, and that you have given a lot of love and compassion to that individual to find the way to express their potential and express their talent. And if you haven't got there, you're probably doing them a favor, because they're not in the right job. They're not in the right context. They're not in the right company. And it's a difficult conversation to have with leads, right? Because people cringe when you have these conversations with them. It's like, yeah, I get it, but I still don't want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I was a leader for around 3 years. I've reverted back into being a recruitment specialist now. I actually got criticism from C-level that I befriended my team and my colleagues, and I was becoming too personal with them. But I actually found that it did help, right? Even with rejection, for example, we were all let go. And I had to tell like 30 people that we were all kind of let go from the company. And I started off with my team because I was closest to them. And it was like a very intimate kind of chat. We cried, we laughed, we had a long lunch afterwards together, because what do you do after you're laid off and you have no job? You have a 2-hour lunch in an Italian restaurant. I told the Italian waiter and he said limoncello. I was like, absolutely.
Yes, bring the bottle.
Yeah, exactly. So, but just to kind of reiterate, I was criticized for being close to my team, and also as a recruiter, I really not befriend, but like you said, I really get close with my candidates because and my hiring managers, because I feel like, hey, I'm going to work with these people eventually, or I'm working with the hiring managers a couple of hours a day sometimes, right? Like to understand what role I'm working on, to see if the candidates are good, etc. Like we're going to have a working relationship. So why just have a working persona and then be yourself at home? Why not just bring that with you? I guess people are just afraid of how, if they're their true selves at work, like how they're going to be perceived, right? So I wonder, as a young leader, for example, if I spoke to you before, I started my career as a recruitment manager, how to handle this feedback that like, oh, I'm being too friendly, and what's the line between being too friendly with colleagues or...
I think my first challenge to that would be, and what is the impact of that? Like what kind of flaw or gap or negative consequence do you experience witnessing me doing that, right? So I would like to see what is the argument for it. Like, are you just allergic to the way that I establish relationships with my team because you have an issue with it personally, or do you believe that it's going to have negative consequences for my performance as a lead? So somebody could tell you, well, I am afraid that by becoming too friendly with them, you may not be able to give them tough feedback, or to tell them, when they're not delivering what they need to deliver. And if you can sort of counter argue to that and say, no, actually, that's my way to be able to say that. Amazing. I don't necessarily befriend the people that I work with, or the people that I lead, but I want to have authentic relationships with them. So I remember, like last year, we always have a summer party every year. It's more than a summer party. I think so. We call it Mission Day. We have actually a lot of working. We work a lot on our strategy. We do a retro on what we have achieved, and we talk about what's coming next. But in between like things, there's also like a big party that is a celebration for the entire company. We do it in Estonia usually. And so last year we had a big party, and I was spending it with my team, and I had a few drinks. I wasn't drunk, but I had a few drinks, and I must have come across as a lot more relaxed than what I usually am at work. And I remember somebody in my team said, thank you for being vulnerable, or like thank you for letting yourself go. We had never seen this side of you, because I was joking a lot. I was like, just kidding around, like a lot more than I usually do. And yeah, that's probably because I was tired and I had a couple of drinks, and I was like, oh, I can let go. But that made me think, right? Because I thought, oh, wow, I mean, they need to see me like this to understand that that's actually who I am more than, like what I do at work.
Yeah.
But that doesn't take away from the fact that I want to have like authentic relationships with them, like, and so maybe they don't see the funnier side of me, or the side of me that sort of like sits lazily on a couch and I don't know, and jokes around, but I do want to have authentic relationships with them, and I think even just the fact that they told me, oh, it's nice to see you like this, is a sign of safety, right?
Yeah.
That that they know that we can have those conversations, and I can also say in return, yes, but this is probably the first and last time that you see me after having 2 drinks, because I don't like that, like I don't want you to see this side of me necessarily, but everybody has their own personal approach. So I would say to you, as long as you can manage these people's performance effectively, I really don't care. Obviously, I want them to feel respected. I want you to feel good in those relationships. But if that means that you want to befriend them more, if you're still capable of managing their performance, nobody should give you that feedback. I think it's out of line.
Yeah, I think it was more about like the concern of like favorite treatment, so
Prove it.
yeah, prove it, exactly. And it's just how we're wired, right? Like I'm saying weird, but I'm wired. I like to, if I'm going to work closely with someone, I'd like to just get to know them a bit better. But that's interesting about the feedback you received during, when you're having drinks with your colleagues, because I think it's not about having personas, right? It's more about like, I have also a serious side. And if I'm at work and you're, for example, giving trainings and stuff about psychological safety, like you can't just crack jokes and, oh, you don't feel safe, haha. Like you also have to be taken seriously at work. I think that's also a concern for some people, right?
Yeah, and I think, we were talking about vulnerability before starting the conversation. And I was telling you about Brené Brown and everything that she says about vulnerability. And I believe in that. And I believe in being vulnerable with my team. But there are different ways to be vulnerable. So for me, being vulnerable with my team means I can say when I made a mistake, or I can say when I'm feeling overwhelmed. I can talk about I'm very confused right now. So I know you would like answers from me, but I don't think I have answers myself. Or I know you would like me to explain more about where the team is going. I have an idea, but I'm not sure that we can pull it off. So I don't want to talk to you about it yet. Whereas, say, with my husband or with my best friend, I can be that vulnerable, and I can say, like, this is what I would like to do with my team, but I'm not sure if my boss is going to say yes to that, or I'm not sure if the market, is going to allow me to pivot in this direction. So with them, I can be fully vulnerable. But with my team, sometimes I cannot, but I can still, to a degree, say, I would love to do this, or I would love to speak about this right now, or I would love to be in better shape, but I'm actually, very, very tired, or, I'm not even sure I agree with what is going on. So I don't want to talk to you about it until I made peace with it. And I can talk to you confidently about where we're going with this project or that project.
Yeah, I got lots of respect being vulnerable to my team and saying like, at one point I was like, I'm feeling a bit burnt out. And I was also in that conflict in my head, like, should I say something or should I just be that figure that's, you know, stable, confident, I got my shit together, you know, just to be like a role model for the team. There's also that conflict within companies sometimes where as a leader, you get told like, oh, some things are happening, like don't tell your team, right? You cannot communicate this to anyone. And then your team hounds you, right? And says, what's going on? Like we're sensing this, like please tell us. How do you navigate around like politics, I guess?
There's something about, I think, without going too deep, we learn our, or we develop and create our dynamics with authority when we're developing as kids, mostly with our parents or parental figures or adults, right? And sometimes I feel like there is a tendency to compare the relationship between a lead and the team to, you know, even subconsciously to like parents and children. But you have to remember that you're there to manage adults' performance. That's what I always tell leads. You know, you're not managing people, you're managing their performance. And these are all adults. These are all like individuals with their lives, with their families. And so it is really not your place to be a parent figure. That model of leadership is so outdated, you know? So I think there's nothing wrong with saying things are happening, but we're not allowed to talk about them. I wish I could right now, but I'm sure that the reason why we're not able to talk about it is because there's still a lot of details to define. You know, for example, like with my team, what happens is that if I say one thing, then they want to know more, right? And maybe not all the details are squared out, so you cannot talk about it. Just the other day, I was thinking about. I was thinking randomly, but I think this is going to be a good example. Randomly about one moment where I felt like I failed as a lecturer, and again, even as a lecturer with your students, you want to create psychological safety. So I had a group of students that was very safe with me, and the first time they took their exam, and I marked all their essays. Then I had a lecture with them, but I still hadn't published the grades. Because we had to wait until like 2 days later. Prof, have you graded the essays? And I'm like, yes, I have. That was at the beginning of the lecture. And then I was like, I'm not gonna say anything, right? And like, so how did it go? And I'm like, oh, come on, guys, you know, like you'll see the grades when they get published. And they insisted, right? And so I said, well, let's just say that a lot of you did okay. There are a few of you that failed, but that's not a bad thing. You know, like we can work on that. I give you extensive feedback, and I notice a trend in like you quoting a lot of sources that are not robust enough for the kind of essay that I gave you. So, you know, there's something to do about that. Anyway, so I said that at 8 a.m, and then I had to spend 4 hours with them. So I completely sort of forgotten about it because who cares? You know, I had graded everything, you know, I'd done my job, you know, they asked me, they insisted. And then at the end of the lecture, they said, oh, Gab, you say you always want feedback. And we just wanted to tell you that we were talking during the break that we all felt awful today. And we couldn't really follow the lecture because we were all thinking, what if I am the one who failed? Or what if I am the one who used wrong sources? Because if I think about my essay, I actually probably made that mistake, right? So all of us were really thinking, am I going to be among the ones who failed? And I was just thinking about this because that's a very good example of like, of the reason why you shouldn't talk sometimes as a leader, you know, like in that kind of circumstance, the lecturer is a bit of like the leader of the group. And even if people insisted, I should have just been like, I'm not going to tell you anything, because then, you know, as a consequence of that, I was told, well, you gave us the wrong feedback at the beginning of the morning. And basically you ruined the entire lecture for us because nobody could focus because they were thinking about their own failure. So that's a good example of why sometimes you cannot say things.
Yeah. And we'll talk about lecturing and public speaking and confidence a bit later on. Just more of like a personal question, I think, more of like an employee kind of situation, right? How could I establish psychological safety like with my manager if they're not aware of this? So for example, I've had a very passive manager before who would avoid conflicts, avoid telling me anything bad, pretty much. And if it was only good news, she would like have a meeting with me and like, oh, like we're doing well with the company, etc. If my manager's like avoidant and someone's listening and they're like, oh, I totally relate, how can I try and get that safety with my manager or try and persuade them?
I think when it comes to like an interpersonal relationship between two people, it's less so of a psychological safety conversation and more like a trust conversation. So how can you establish trust with this individual? For example, like if you are someone who likes to have genuine conflict and they avoid conflict, right? As you said, I think it's about expectations. I think it's about clarifying your expectations as much as you can and try and get the expectation of that other person. We need to respect the fact that some people genuinely don't want to have conflict. I love conflict. I thrive in conflict. For me, like if I start arguing about something, I feel excited. And I also love it when people try to destroy what I said, and I do the same with them, and but respectfully, but that really excites me. Like if I say something like, oh, I believe this, and they're like, this is bullshit, like, and they want to, and they want to talk about the opposite view. Like for me, it's so exciting, but a lot of people find this threatening, really threatening. And we need to respect their boundaries, right? So, but that doesn't necessarily undermine the trust that we can create the moment that we're all transparent and very also very unapologetic about who we are. So for example, like I always say, I'm not really good at writing emails in English with a good tone. I always come across as very aggressive when I write, especially if I'm negotiating or especially if it's a back and forth. The way that I write in English will never be the British way of writing, something. I will always come across as very direct, very straightforward, and borderline, aggressive, even if I don't want to. But sometimes, like I put a disclosure at the beginning of my email and I'm like, just put a filter on this because remember, I'm Italian. And that already does wonders for me because it just reminds people that I am not communicating at their level. I am communicating at my level. And my level is loud, direct, passionate.
Unapologetic.
Yeah, unapologetic.
Yeah.
So a lot of people may confuse that for a lack of respect, but actually the moment I am shouting, I am respecting you because I grew up in a family where everybody shouted.
Yeah.
So
you guys just see Italian dinners. You shout and then someone else shouts on top of you to prove a point. And another person is just how we communicate.
And this is family love in a lot of Italian families,
We're pretty quiet right now. We're not shouting.
But you know what I mean, right? Like that's my way of communicating respect. If I am giving you polite answers and if I am giving you safe answers, it means I probably don't respect, like our conversation as much.
Yeah. So how do I get, just going back to the point, like someone who isn't communicative or isn't on the same level as me, but they're my boss, to kind of have this relationship and kind of force a relationship essentially?
I think you discuss this, right? So you try and bring this to the surface and you just say, what do you value in a relationship? You ask your lead, what do you value in a relationship? What do you expect from me? What do you, how do you prefer us to communicate? And then can I tell you how I like it? Can I tell you what I think about this? And can I tell you who I am in this kind of relationship, and can we meet halfway? Because you'll always have to compromise, right? You'll never, sometimes you'll have a lead that is exactly, tuned in at the same sort of level that you are. But most of the times this won't happen. So how do you do that? In psychology, there's a construct that is called the psychological contract. Again, something that not a lot of people are talking about, but we make it a pillar in our leadership development advice, for example, because I strongly believe in it. What are all the unspoken expectations that you have and that your lead has? People don't talk about them because they're called unspoken expectations, but these are psychological contracts that are very strong between two people. So, for example, you subconsciously or maybe even openly expect your lead to be challenging or expect your lead to talk to you very directly, right? And you don't say that when people hire you. you don't sign a psychological contract with people, but you do get to a job with a lot of psychological expectations. Imagine like a trainee that has a degree in law and that gets hired by a law firm to be a personal assistant and make photocopies, right? So that person has a degree in law and will take a PA job in a prestigious law firm. But do you think that that's all they want? They're probably thinking, oh, that's my way in, right? And so they will enter that job, they will enter that contract, that employment contract, with a lot of expectation to like, yeah, I'm going to make photocopies, but then I'm going to meet, all the lawyers, and then they're going to see that I'm smart, and then, maybe there's going to be a position one day, and blah, 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 blah. And people hire them thinking, yeah, they have a law degree, so they'll work harder. And they're coming in and they're going to make photocopies until midnight because, they really want to have a career. All of this stuff doesn't go into contracts. So you have to think, how many things do you have in your psychological contract with your lead that you haven't really spoken about? And how many do they have?
Yeah. And do we just
disclose them?
When? Like in your probation, in the first time you have a one-on-one with your boss?
Yeah. I think ideally, yes. But you can do it at any point in time. You can just say, can we just realign on this? And can I tell you who I am in conflict, who I am with feedback, who I am when you need to talk about my performance, or when you need to, when we need to work together, and who are you? What do you expect? What's the level of communication that you want from me? This type of alignment people don't do because it's like, oh, this is work. People don't even do that in marriages. People get married and never discuss this, right? So it's not an uncommon thing.
No, absolutely. And I'm just thinking of it from a recruiter's perspective, because we do ask a lot of questions when we offer someone a job. So I'm now thinking like, maybe I should start asking like, oh, what are the kind of unsaid things that you want from this employment, right? So of course we ask like, oh, what kind of expectations do you have with salary, and like, do you want a permanent contract and stuff like that? But we need to, I guess, go deeper, right? Like, what will make you satisfied in the next 6 months, 1 year? Like, what are your expectations from us?
I think in that specific moment, you have to be careful, though, that it is not 100% safe for a candidate to disclose that to you. Whereas the moment I am hired, in a sense, like I know I have the job, I have been assessed for my experience, for my skills, and I know I'm capable to do this job. And now I can have an alignment conversation with my manager, because otherwise our relationship is always going to be imbalanced. The moment I don't have a job contract, it's going to be really difficult for me to tell you what my unspoken expectations are. Let's go back to that example of that, person with a law degree that enters a law firm with a job as a PA. They will never disclose to you that they don't care about being a PA.
Yeah.
They'll say, oh yeah, no, this is amazing. This is exactly what I want. And it's within their right, but then slowly they might disclose to you, well, of course, like I study so hard, this is my way in, but I do expect growth. Right?
Yeah. I call this like the interview game, that you reveal piece by piece, like what you actually want, right? It must be something to do with psychology, right? Because you don't want to like offload in the first 30 minutes of meeting a stranger, a recruiter, right? Like, I need this, and my marriage is falling apart, so I definitely need a permanent contract, and stuff like this. I think it's just basic psychology, right?
Yeah. It's how you manage your professional identity, which goes back to, for example, how we manage our identities on social networks, right? So we always present, like the best version of ourselves. And you're also getting judged, like you're getting assessed. So it will never be an even relationship, because somebody is assessing whether or not they should invest money on you. So, how can you be vulnerable? Like I tried, I have been in that position many times, and I try to be honest, but then there's a lot of things that, you can't just disclose, yet.
Yeah. And talking about judging, we spoke about this before we started recording, and I thought that was quite interesting, about the public speaking, coaching and training that you give, right? So as a personal example, I'm going to give a lecture at a university. I know what I'm talking about. I'm kind of confident about the presentation, but I am obviously afraid, right? So for those that are in leadership or doing something like lecturing, for example, or just want to be confident when they're speaking up about something, what's some basic tips that you have?
Many things, I guess. The first one is be very well prepared on the content. I bumped into a structure, like a framework for presenting ideas, writing emails, doing public speaking that is called the Barbara Minto Pyramid Principle. It's an incredibly popular framework in consultancy firms. So anyone who works at like PwC, Deloitte, like will know about this. There's a book which is a bit like it's a bit wordy, let's say, but I like it. And if you don't want to read the book, there's a lot of stuff online, and it's basically this idea that you build your arguments bottom up, but then you present them top down, right? So it basically advocates for you to always know what your main statement is and what your supporting statements are. Yeah, so I always recommend that you go into any public speaking situation with a clear plan on what you want to say. You don't need to learn everything by heart. But if I were, something that I like doing when I'm coaching people on public speaking is give me the 30-second summary of your speech. Like, can you summarize it in 30 seconds? If they cannot, I know there's a lot of work to do. But if in 30 seconds, 60 seconds, they can tell me what the argument is and how it's going to start and sort of get to a middle and end, then I know that we've done that and the content is there. Because even if you forget everything, you still know where you need to go. Yeah. So content, first thing. Second thing, get out of that acting. I think for a while, and maybe to a certain extent even today, there's a lot of acting coaching that goes into public speaking. Project your voice, do this, do that, and
Sit
yes,
like this.
yeah, exactly, posture, etc. And I think to a certain extent it makes sense. I'm grateful for learning certain things, such as like a neutral posture. So when you're standing, always remember what your starting posture is, right? So feet slightly apart, and then your arms along your body. Yeah, and for an Italian as well, right? Remember not to gesticulate too much. So this kind of stuff, great. And you can find this. You don't need a coach. Like you can find so many recommendations for this stuff online. But the most important thing is, how do I create a way for me to be at peace with who I am and what I'm presenting, and again, like being unapologetic about it, So stop. Like one story I'll tell you quickly. I worked at the BBC for a long time, and I spent maybe the first 2 or 3 years of my life at the BBC feeling inadequate as an Italian, as an immigrant in the UK. Just feeling like I don't belong here, and a lot of people were reminding me that, like, oh, wow, you're so passionate about this, or why do you speak about this like that? That's not how we do it, So I had a lot of stuff on my mind. I kept saying sort of, oh, well, you need to learn to be different. Like you need to learn to navigate this society and function in this society. And I went to a popular acting for business, like a popular school that does acting training in the UK, that was also like teaching leaders to do public speaking, etc. So part of this training was that you would give a presentation at the beginning, and then you would give the same presentation at the end of the training to basically show all your improvements.
Right.
So I gave a presentation at the beginning. Everybody liked it, kind of gave me some feedback. And then after the training, I was so in my head, like 2 days later, that the last presentation that I gave, which was the same one, but with all the stuff that I learned, people told me it was so disappointing. Everybody was like, oh my God, like your first one was so much better. And that taught me such a lesson, that being in your head about my eyes should do this and my voice should do that. And, and I should talk like they talk on TED Talk, or, like all of this stuff. I don't think it's valuable. Like I think, who are you? Where do you feel confident? Yes, everybody's standing, but do you feel more confident sitting? Sit down on the stage, And they tell you not to crack jokes. But for you, it's important to crack a joke at the beginning or to tell a story because that's how you do it. Do it. Like you need to find your internal compass. Because otherwise, just like we were talking about work personas, you're acting. And why would you act? People will know that you're acting, People will know that you're giving them Have you ever seen those presenters that are like so perfect, and then thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for being here?
Reading
It's
a
like, come on,
teleprompter
you know?
and yeah.
Yeah. And especially when you're doing public speaking on the stuff that you were talking about, yeah, you've got so much to be authentic about, how you went about finding a job, and your own experience, and what you see in candidates that you interview every day. So give them that.
Yeah, this is also valuable advice for people who are doing presentations in their interviews. I'm noticing this a lot. Like, I'm also asking candidates to come in and give a presentation about something. And I've also done it before. I don't know if you have, for part of an interview process, to give
Yeah.
a presentation. God, and then your nerves just, yeah, you really think like, oh my God, am I even good enough for this job? Like, how are they going to see me? So I think this advice of just not being an actor and just tapping into your authentic self, I think it's just basic advice, but it's really helpful.
I think it's powerful, and then you can build on that. Because of course, as I was saying, there are ways to structure the presentation so that, and people are a bit more engaged, and there are tricks and tips, of course, but I think the first thing that we need to do is to work on ourselves. I have now delivered workshops in front of thousands of people at the same time, even. And you're always nervous, right? You're always
It never goes away then.
no, it never goes away. But at least you kind of know who you are, and who you want to present, and you just go and do it. I don't think I would like doing it every day personally. I love one-to-one contact as well. But when you're delivering training to 250 people, last year we did something at Wise, and it was like almost 2,000 people in an arena for 90 minutes, and we were doing learning together. And how can you study that? You just have to show up on the stage and be like, I'm here to facilitate your learning today. And I love, making fun of myself, I remember I started with, I had the whole arena say hi to me in Italian. Because, for example, like, I'm always very conscious that when I'm talking, people will wonder, oh, where's his accent from? Right. I always think about this, and I see people looking at me like, it happens to me in Italian as well, because I speak with a very kind of neutral accent in Italian. So people are like, I can't tell where you're from, really. And so I love to crack a joke about it. So I'm just like, before you ask yourself anything, like in front of like all these people, I'm like, I'm from Italy, and I would also love for you to greet me in Italian today. So this is how you do it, right? And that's a way to master the audience, as in just saying, well, this is who I am. This is what you get today.
Yeah. So,
Again, unapologetic.
yeah, that's amazing. Is it okay if I steal that
Yeah,
from my
sure,
workshops?
sure.
Not Italian, but for example, everyone says, oh, your English accent, you must be from the UK.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I get it all the time.
Yeah. And you just go with like, no, your vulnerability is just present them. And just say, this is what I'm working with. People love it because everyone has vulnerabilities, and everyone knows that, in your position, they would feel nervous, or they would feel about, oh yeah, are they looking at my shape, or are they looking at my clothes, or what do they think about the fact that I'm bald, or, like all of this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's just about expectations though, right? That you have so many people attending. So are they expecting something perfect? Are they expecting to learn like quick tips and tricks like straight away, and just putting yourself on that pedestal, and you're kind of like, oh my God, do I know what I'm talking about? And that's when the nerves kick in, right? So you're saying that like vulnerability actually plays in your favor when you're doing like a presentation or public speaking.
Yeah, and maybe you don't know what you're talking about, and so you say, you know what? I've been called to do this lecture on this. This is what I know. So this is what I'm coming with today. Like, I don't have a degree in recruitment. I don't, I'm joking. But like I don't have a PhD in recruitment, but I'm here because boom, boom, boom. When I do training with my trainers, so the trainers I have in my team, and we learn about how to facilitate, I always tell them one of the biggest things that you should do at the beginning is establish your credibility. Why are you here? Every good trainer does that. At the beginning of a trainer says, why do you have to give me airtime? well, for example, like I'm a psychologist. I've done this, and that. I've worked X years, or, I work in the L&D team and this is what I do. And this is for how long I've been doing this workshop, which means I've coached hundreds of people. Listen to me. So what's your key of like, what's your authentic way to tell people this is why you should be listening to me?
Yeah. And it's so powerful as well.
Yeah.
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 Just to circle back on the psychological safety topic. So if someone from an organization is like listening to this and thinking, oh, we need to get on board with this, what are the benefits of implementing it into a company? I saw, for example, like employee retention, like people feel like they're heard, they're valued, so they're more likely to stay longer at a company. Are there any other benefits?
Definitely high performance. It's been like demonstrated in so many studies. Actually, Amy Edmondson talks about this when she first came up with like the most recent contemporary definition of psychological safety that we discussed at the beginning. Came from a study of observing medical teams and understanding that the ones that were performing better than all the others were the ones that were able to admit their mistakes. Which really caught our attention and that of our team at the beginning, because these teams continuously reported mistakes and they appeared to be the ones that were making the most mistakes, but they were not. They were just able to talk about it. They were just able to do retros and to just openly say, well, we failed here. So what else can we do, or how can we do this differently, right? So I think that's the most important thing, to just remember that it's about creating an environment where people are not afraid of making mistakes. People are not afraid of having difficult conversations, and there is a resilience in continuously redo things until you get it right. Yeah. And this is what ultimately delivers high performance for teams. So the ability of discussing where mistakes have been made and do it again, try it again. So that's for sure something. I think there are also a lot of studies talking about organizational citizenship behavior. Which I know is a complex thing, but it's a complex name, but what I'm talking about is like the way that people carry themselves in an organization. So organizational citizenship behavior. So imagine a good citizen. What is a good citizen? A good citizen is somebody that looks after their community, that is respectful of their community, that is an active, engaged member of the community. So organizational citizenship behavior means exactly that somebody is a good employee, is an engaged employee, an employee who cares, an employee who is invested in the strategy and the mission of the organization. So that's another aspect connected with psychological safety.
Oh, wow. I was trying to relate to what you're saying. And now I realize that in my Slack channel, I'm so open about the mistakes I make. And I think people also have this as well. They're so conscious about like, oh shit, does my team maybe think I'm incapable of my job, right? If I keep saying it. But I think subconsciously, I just wanted to create a very open environment. Like, hey guys, I'm noticing this, or I'm doing this maybe wrong. Anyone else? And it actually fosters more communication. People are actually like, oh, that's happening to me too. And, people are starting to open up. But I was, subconsciously doing that then, I guess, to just make the team speak more because they were not talking up.
Yeah. That's something you can definitely do as a leader. And it works a lot better than saying my door is always open and then never having conversations with anyone. Because, in a non-safe environment, people will never ask you to talk, even if you say that, your door is open, because they will wonder, the door is open, but can I talk about this? Can I say that I made a mistake, or can I say that I'm not too sure about this or that thing? So a lot of leaders make this mistake of being like, I'm here, like you can always talk to me. But then how do you sort of back up all of that, right? And you do it by being vulnerable and by showing that, yes, I'm here, but also I'm someone who admits their mistakes to you, so you can do the same with me.
Yeah, so like leading by example, showing them first, setting the ground. right?
giving feedback, asking for feedback,
Oh, to
asking
your
for
team.
feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Which is bold because sometimes leaders don't want to hear that.
I don't like feedback. I have no problems admitting that I'm not the most graceful. I take feedback on board. I really do. This is something that so also like a lot of my leads have recognized to me. But I'll give you a hard time, when you're giving me feedback. So I'll challenge, because chances are that I have thought about it 100 times before doing something. So if you have a different opinion, I will have a lot of arguments as to why I've done something. But that's exactly what I was telling you earlier. I like that kind of conflict of like, for example, like I decide, the students example, like telling me you've done this, and that. And so you've talked about our essays. And so we were all thinking about that rather than following the lecture. So you shouldn't have told us. That kind of feedback I took on board, because I made a mistake because I didn't think about disclosing that information. I just disclosed the information because they asked me, but I never really went to the lecturer thinking I will not talk about this, or I will talk about this if they ask me. No, I didn't have a plan. I acted, on impulse. And so that feedback I can take well. But, if somebody says, oh, that workshop, you did this, and I'm not sure if that was the best thing, I will have a lot of arguments as to why I've done something, right? But I still tell people, challenge me, please. Just know that I'm not going to just take it. I'm going to clap back, and I want you to clap back. And so I think even that is important. I always tell people, I do take feedback on board, but I'm going to challenge you. So just be strong when you give me feedback, because I'll
Yeah.
not be the most graceful at taking it, but I will listen.
I love that you're just so like authentic. You're probably the most authentic guest we've had, and you just own it. And I think it's refreshing, because it's just, I'm also learning as well from this conversation that it's just okay. Like you don't have to hide like your shadow self, right? Like if you can't handle feedback and criticism, like just own it.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's okay. But then just learn from it, grow from it, and just kind of maybe disclose it so people respect
Yeah.
it as well.
All the role models I have had in my life about this are women, successful women, or like women who became leaders, or who just owned who they were, because they had to fight with society so much to get to that place. That, and I think this is something I learned from the women in my life, to be, maybe because I'm also gay. So like I had to question my position in society, to a certain extent. So I have a lot of privilege because, I'm white and Western, and I'm a male. And so unfortunately, I have a lot of privilege compared to other people. But my having a different sexuality kind of pushed me in a corner at some point, especially when I was growing up. Like, I'm not like everyone else. So how do I navigate this? And I think in a sense, I found a common theme or a common narrative with women that navigate. You're expected to be a mother, you're expected to be a good wife, you're expected not to be alone, to always have a man on your side. And I found a lot of common themes, with my own personal battles. And so these amazing women that, the universe gave me in the span of my career and my life taught me this. Just be vulnerable and own your vulnerability. I think this is something that women do amazingly well, successful women.
Oh, thank you so much. Like it's so refreshing, because the amount of times that I've been called like behind closed doors, not me being present, like bitchy for being a leader, right? In an authoritative figure. I've been told I'm too emotional and maybe I should reconsider my leadership title. I was like, too emotional. So have you also been like in a situation as an LGBTQIA plus member, it keeps getting longer, like in a position where it's like you're being challenged or you had to like hide who you were?
I never hid who I was. I never will. There's, we did Advice. We do a blog every year, the month of Pride. And I wrote something like a personal statement, like on behalf of sort of the gay community within the workforce at Advice. And I just quoted a speech that was given by one of the trans actors at oh my God, I forgot the name of that TV series. It's about the Paris is Burning sort of ballroom scene in New York. It's set in the 80s. I forgot the name. We're going to find out.
Yeah, we can write it down.
Yeah, we can write it down. Anyway, she gave this powerful speech at the end, when receiving an award, and said, I'm not asking for your respect. You will give me respect, you know? Like, you don't have any authority to decide whether or not, I'm worthy of your respect. No, I demand your respect. So I've always felt like that, as in sort of, I don't care what you think. You may be against this, for religious reasons, for personal reasons. I don't care. You owe me respect, right? So that I've always done. But I think I have been called emotional before, and I have been called too passionate or too straightforward, too direct. And I know it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because I think also as a psychologist, as a coach, as a leader, sometimes I go very deep with people. Very deep and very quick. And sometimes people are like, whoa, you just entered a personal area, or you just entered a side of me I'm not comfortable in sharing, for example. And on that, you got to learn to, take it back, because you want to be respectful of everybody's sort of boundaries. But of course, yeah, I think like a woman that is a leader and has 3 kids has a much harder fight than I do to carry out, unfortunately,
Yeah.
So I don't want to compare my experience to that of a woman who's a business leader and a mother, because there's no comparison. I have it much easier.
I just wish I spoke to you before I had like that meeting a few years ago where I was called too emotional and asked to like maybe reconsider, because I didn't react to that feedback really well, because it was really like unexpected, right? I was like, wait a minute. Like, I also went into defensive mode, because I was like, you're challenging like who I am, right? I'm also very loud, outspoken, maybe emotional, but at least I'm authentic, right? So if maybe you spoke to me back then, prepared me for the meeting, and we knew it was going to happen, like, how could I react to that more professionally and make my manager understand, like, this is who I am, you have to essentially respect me?
Does it impact my performance, or does it impact my ability to drive the performance of my team? If not, please, let's close this conversation. It's unethical and unprofessional to attack a person on their personal traits, and I think it's a thing that is used against women a lot, in general, and against differences, like, you're not fitting the mold, you're not fitting the way that we handle meetings, you're not fitting the way that we talk about performance, you're not fitting the way that we handle relationships. There is such a thing, unfortunately, as a cultural fit in an organization, but we know that doesn't really lead to productivity, and actually leads to groupthink and just, folding on yourself, basically, because you keep having people that resemble your behaviors or resemble your approach to things. So that's why diversity is so important. So you wanted diversity, suck it up now, like, that's the core of it.
Yeah.
Respectfully, of course, right? Because sometimes, like, people might say, well, your being like this makes me feel threatened. Okay, let's discuss it then. Like, I don't never want you to feel threatened by who I am, right?
Yeah.
So if my being in a certain way threatens you, let's discuss how I can make it different, or how can I adjust so that you also feel safe. Like, I can express myself, but you can express yourself as well, right?
Yeah. So essentially, like, with all the topics we've discussed, because it's been so many, it's about being your authentic self and just like really asking and speaking up, and just finding that common ground with people.
From the universe, from your leads, from your partner, from your friends, like, everybody around you should know what you expect, and you should know what they expect as well, like, in return. If we all did this, we would be a better race.
Wow. Work would be a breeze.
Yeah, better human race. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Partnerships would be a breeze. My relationship with my sisters would be phenomenal.
Yeah, it's not easy. That's why psychological safety is so difficult, because it implies talking about the real stuff. you know, and not a lot of people are ready to do that, not even in their personal lives, even less so, you know, at work.
Yeah, it's not just a buzzword. It's not just a trend. Yeah.
No, it's a very well studied and well evidenced construct. So there's decades of research at this point.
Yeah, incredible. So if I'm just gonna wrap this up. We've talked about so many things. It's been so like eye-opening. How can I find you if I want to see more of your content? Because you're gonna start posting more, right, on LinkedIn. Just calling it out. But also if I want to like maybe inquire about some training or learn more about psychological safety, like how can I reach out to you?
Well, so I'm based in Amsterdam, but as I said, I work at Wise, so that kind of like takes all of my time. I mainly sort of focus all of my work on that organization and in that role. But I am part of the D2 collective here in Amsterdam. So
I love the D2.
Exactly. So shout out to the D2 collective. So I take part in their events as much as I can. We did a workshop on psychological safety at the end of April. I'm sure we're going to do more after the summer. I do have a website. I have a LinkedIn page. I'm not on social networks because my having to manage my my social identity really stresses me. So this idea that I have to manage the impression that other people have of me has a really strong impact on my well-being, and my well-being is more important than any promotion that I can do to myself. So that's why I don't post a lot, because I do not want to have a worry in my life of being liked by other people. It's a trigger for me. So I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram. I'm nowhere on social networks apart from LinkedIn, because I kind of have to be. But I try to I welcome one-to-one contact. So if anybody, you know, wants to reach out to me directly, I'm super happy for them to do that. But yeah, I don't have much to say about like, oh, follow me, because every Sunday I post about this or I post about that. And I really don't. But if you want to have a nice conversation about something, you know, I'm available.
No, Gabriele, this was amazing.
Thank you for
Honestly,
having me.
I learned so much as well for my lecture coming up as well, and just in general. And I'm sure everyone else has learned so much from you. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Let us know how the lecture goes.
Thanks.